So, welcome, folks, to another podcast on the series of building a high performance team. Today, I'm delighted that we have John Gilley, CEO of Kentech. John, welcome to the podcast. Good to see you.
Thanks very much, Dara. Thanks for having me on.
Yep, delighted you're here. John, I'll dig straight in. And I guess the first thing that I'd like to ask you is, can you tell me a little bit about, John Gilley, CEO of Kentech, and John Gilley, the person, more personal stuff about you?
No problem. Yes. So I'm from Cove, or I like to say to people I'm from Ireland, but more importantly, I'm from Cork. I'm
Fair.
hail from the town of Cove. I was born in 1971. I'm 49 years young. I went to school, secondary school in Cove. I then went up to CIT for a couple of years in mechanical engineering, and then over to London. I graduated in with a degree in mechanical engineering out of Middlesex University. And then started working in Clonmel. Actually, my first job was given to me by a mutual friend of ours, Mark Barry, in the computer aided design department of up in Clonmel for a period of about 6 months, and then I went to Saudi for 3 years with Kent's, working in project controls on some of their larger EPC contracts. And then I think around the age of about 24, I realized there was more to life than being stuck in Saudi, and I got offered a job seconded into Shell in Venezuela, which is a big change from going from Saudi to Venezuela. I was there for 2 years working offshore for Shell, responsible for technical integrity of all of their assets there. And then I came back to Ireland. My father was very anxious that I come home and meet a nice Irish girl, and I came back and worked for a really cool company called Proscon that's since been bought by Rockwell. And that was based actually out of Cove, out of the old dockyard in Cove. I was there for 2 years, and I met my wife, Rasha. I suppose I would have been happy enough to stick around there, but Rasha really fancied traveling. So I took a job with Kentech, first job with Kentech then in Mexico, 2001. I was there for a couple of years with Rosh, and then moved back into the corporate office in Cork, based out of Little Island. And I was trying to manage operations globally out of Cork. It was difficult, and eventually, as Kentech grew its business in the Middle East, the CEO at the time, Sarah Kent, asked me to come down and be managing director for our business across the Middle East from 2007, 2008 timeframe. We were experiencing some heavy growth. And then in 2012, I think I got promoted to Chief Operating Officer. So looking after all operations in the company globally out of Abu Dhabi. And then as recently as in April, I got promoted into the CEO slot, So I suppose we during that time we moved down to Abu Dhabi with 2 children, aged 3 and 1.5 at the time, and we had another child since. So I've got 2 girls and a boy, and they range from 15 down to 9. Free time, I like to play the guitar. I like to sing. Especially like a good session in the Roaring Donkey in Cove would be my favorite venue, and play a little bit of golf. I like to keep fit. And when there's no COVID, I do like to do a bit of snowboarding over the winter.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And it's a fabulous career story taking you to where you are today. Arguably probably the pinnacle of leadership in the corporate world, CEO. And for such a large global company as well. It's really fascinating. John, can you tell me a bit about, in terms of leadership, what it means to you to be a leader?
Yeah. It's a question I don't really ask myself that often, I guess, it's like leadership is crucial at all levels of companies. It doesn't matter where you are, and leadership inside in teams is crucial, and it's not just the person who's in charge of the team. You see, even on football fields, you see leaders emerge that don't necessarily wear the armband, but they're clear leaders on the pitch, like say James Milner now for Liverpool, or the players like that, I suppose what when we talk about trying to inspire teams, newer generations like Gen Z or and that they're not interested in being managed any longer. They want to follow great leaders, really. They want to be inspired and follow like what's a common goal or almost like a higher purpose, if you like. So I kind of feel that a real test of leadership is if you actually strip away the title. Will your team still follow you? Will people still follow you? And that's the test of a great leader.
That's
I suppose what you're trying to do is what you're trying to do as a leader is be inspirational and inspire people, to get behind a common goal or a higher purpose. And I suppose the only way that you can do that, I always like to put right at the center of this really is trust. I always like to talk about the trust equation, where you've got like trust is equal to credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation. So like the credibility is, are you credible? Do you know what you're doing? Have you done it before? It's like, follow me. I know how to do this. I've done it before. You can see that I've done it before. Reliability is crucial, because it's a case of I'm going to promise you that, like I promised you I'd come on this podcast and I've delivered. That's reliability. When you tell somebody that something's going to happen for them, you've got to come through with it. So you're being reliable. And then intimacy is it's really at the high levels of leadership for me. Is that people are ready to open up to you and you understand what's going on in their life, because everything is all, like work and life now is somewhat getting mixed up a little bit, especially during this pandemic. So the intimacy for you to open up and be vulnerable to people that you're trying to lead or people that you're trying to work for, and for them to do the same in return is great. So like when you sum all of those three things, the thing that destroys it, or the thing that reduces the trust, is self-orientation. So selfishness. What could I get out of this? So when you start thinking about, how can I improve my own lot out of what we're getting out of this, it divides everything that you've been trying to accomplish. But to kind of bring it back to what it means to me is like, for me, it's just amazing enjoyment. I get fantastic sense of achievement out of being a leader. I'm considered as a leader, and I absolutely love when I can sit back and look at teams that have grown up or stood up on different projects and see them succeed. But I suppose the more that I see that, I know that I'm being successful when I'm actually not having to do very much work. And you see the teams that you created, that they're just going off and they're even creating their own goals and they're following those. And that helps to reduce the only downside of leadership, which is a sense of enormous responsibility. Where you're kind of feeling responsibility for people's futures and livelihoods.
Yeah, there's some fascinating insights there. Fascinating insights, John. Can I, you've been a leader for a long time now. In terms of kind of nature versus nurture, where have you found the balance yourself? Has it been, are you kind of born a leader, or can you learn it? What's been your experience?
Look, I think everybody has leadership qualities, just the differing amounts, and one of the things that we always talk about at Kentech really is creating an environment where people raise their hand and say, I'd like to take this on, because what we find is that you're coming up with all these initiatives to try and promote, people kind of talk about this open door policy. I've got an open door policy, but if nobody's actually coming through the door, then whilst you might talk about it, you don't have it. So you're trying to get to a stage where you create an environment where everybody feels safe, that they say, look, I actually fancy a crack at this, for me, everybody has the potential to be a great leader, It's just and I wouldn't really link it to levels that you achieve within the organization. I look at teams there on sites, that would be quite practical teams, and you can see, guys or girls that are stepping up, and you say, they're just fantastic leaders, but they're at a trade level or even as a trade assistant level. You can see their leadership shining through,
Right.
But clearly, everybody has to work on themselves, right? You can't just kind of say, well, I want to be a leader because I like the sound of it. You have to dig deep within yourself, and you've got to go off and develop and read as much. There's so much resources available now online that wasn't available to you and I as we were coming up pre-internet, there's just so much you can do for free in order to develop and read about great leaders and look at other stories, and that's what I do all in my free time. I look at fantastic leaders out there, the likes of the guy that's really visible at the moment that I really look up to is Bernard Looney, the Kerry man who's taken over as CEO of BP, and he's absolutely scorching it up. And it's true looking at people like this that you can learn, but you do have to spend the time and look and think about what your blind spots are. How am I going to actually develop those and get yourself a good mentor, a good coach to help you through it, to develop your leadership skills, because whilst you might be born with a natural talent for it, you're certainly not going to be the finished article. None of us are ever going to be the finished article. Every day is a learning day for our leadership, really.
That's their super insights coming out there. I mean, I can see a real growth mindset approach that you have there, John, and it's an ongoing journey. It sounds like this is an ongoing experience. This is an ongoing learning journey for you.
Absolutely.
In terms of kind of planning or intuition in terms of leadership, is there a lot of structure to it, or kind of where would the balance lie between how much you have to plan versus how much you have to kind of think on your feet?
Yeah, I think you got to be the big thing for us. We I think it's about 6 or 7 years ago. Just to give you a story about what happened in Kentech, we were going through a period where we were still making money, but we should have been far more profitable. And at the time, we were doing a lot of construction work. We since changed the balance of the type of work that we do, but at the time, we were doing a lot of construction work. So it was all about productivity. It was all about how much work can the guys get done in the field, and can they do it for the amount of work, the amount that we priced it for, and we were having dips in those productivity. So I was looking at, let's start looking at frontline supervision, because those are the guys and girls that are going to really drive the team, to drive the productivity. At the time, our HR director, a guy called John Cavan, I call him the Oracle. He's an amazing man, actually. He's coming up to his end of his career. You should get him on here, actually. But he put me back at the time. He said, it's not about training these frontline supervision. This is company wide. This is the case for engagement, and it's a case for defining leadership versus management. And when you talk about engagement, really, when you're talking about high performing teams, where you have this, I think there was this analogy of like 10 people inside in a boat, and you had 2 people that were completely engaged, and then you had 4 or 5 people that were showing up and maybe watching the clock, and then maybe 2 people that are actively pulling against you in the boat. So if you could change that ratio of engagement, the whole dynamic of the company changes. You don't have to just zone in on one particular area. And we branded so we started coming up with all these initiatives, and to get proper performance appraisals, to get proper learning and development plans for people, to develop those leaders. We were looking at linking how people were paid with performance, rather than just a really rigid structure, so a really flexible structure as to be how people were rewarded. And we branded it. We decided there was so much of this. It was like an explosion. It was like a reset moment for us. And it's about thinking differently. And we branded the whole thing under what we call K2. So it's like K for Kentech, and it's K to the power of 2. So it's Kentech Empowered, and K2 as not the tallest mountain in the world, but one of the more challenging climbs that you could have. So we branded it all, and it was all about a journey from what we called a mediocre company to a high-performing company, or high-performing teams. And every initiative that we would go into, and in that we branded it under K2, and we branded it as a journey. So we came up with what we call a charter, like a leadership charter. So we got a whole cross section of the company into the room, and we said, right, how are we all going to behave? And a lot of this comes back to behaviors. How are we all going to behave to one another? And let's all document it onto one page and say, these are the types of core values that we'll exhibit. And then in the future, when somebody steps out of line, we can just point to the chart and say, listen, we all agreed that we weren't going to behave like that. So why are you behaving like that now? So that all of that learning and development we bundled up into leadership programs, and it's been a step change for us, in our company's culture over the last 5 or 6 years.
Wow, wow. Clearly a significant amount of planning going in there to make this work, which is not surprising. And it's incredible to hear how much the engagement and kind of getting people behind a higher purpose, if you like, is
Yeah.
fundamental to the success.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the higher purpose type ethos is really coming to the fore of late. And I think that's because we're sitting up and we're having a look at the world around us.
Yeah.
You're looking at environmental issues, or social issues, and then lately with obviously with the effects of this pandemic and what it's doing to the world.
Yeah.
It really is all about that. There's a book that I'd encourage everybody to read. Actually, it's a book called Reinventing Organizations. It's by I think it's from Belgium. Actually, it's a guy called Frederick Laloux. It's a fantastic book. It's about actually different phases of development of organizations. Going from cavemen, hunter-gatherer type organizations into mafia, into army, religious organizations, into organizations then they start talking about culture and almost family type culture. And then the next one up is he refers to as teal, which is really, breaking down the hierarchical structures of traditional companies and replacing them with kind of almost teams of teams, almost like a dynamic organization,
Yeah.
where you start to really take all the layers off the top of the company, and you have this kind of networked organization that is almost self-monitoring. There's no real management any longer, and that these teams, kind of decide on their own goals, decide on their own budgets. And at the height of this, you're talking about people deciding on what they get paid. And it's true peer. It ties in massively with what's available to us now, technology-wise, compared to what was available before. So one of the other books that I really like as well is a book by I think he's like a 2-star general in the American Army. It's called Teams of Teams, Stanley McChrystal. It's a great book as well, and that talks about, and that's very military orientated, and I wouldn't be very military minded myself, but there nevertheless there's some fantastic lessons in there. And it was born out of the American troops going into Afghanistan, in that it wasn't like a traditional war for them. Then they were fighting Al Qaeda, which was a massively network, but not a hierarchical thing. So they had to completely, tear down their hierarchical structure and evolve to, an organization that was really organic and networked, constantly updating one another through technology. And I think for us inside in Kentech, the fear is that you take one book and you say, right, we're all going to rush over here, we're going to follow this model because it's the newest, trendiest model. But what we're trying to do in Kentech is just trying to figure out, get as much learning in as network as we possibly can, and then figure out what's right for us.
Yeah, I'm definitely putting those books on my reading list. Fascinating to see what you can learn about the different types of teams and different environments as well.
Yeah.
I think we've probably touched on a few of the kind of characteristics or critical success factors, but I wonder if I could just kind of go into that a bit more again. And, what do you see as the characteristics of a high performance team, or what are the critical success factors that you see have to be there?
Yeah, so and that was the whole journey of what we call K2. It's looking for high performance. So what are the characteristics of it? The one that I really like is this kind of this equation, and I'm full of equations today, and I'm sorry for this. I think it's like results is equal to R1 times R2 or something like that. I think R1 is equal to R2 times R3, where R1 is the results that you're going to get the team achieves. And then R2 is the resources, and R times the interaction. So the relationships in that team, so it's if the team is you and I, and we're both clever fellas, and you're resourceful in certain areas, and I'm resourceful in other areas, and then we get asked a number of questions, and for some reason you're more dominant than me, and you kind of shout me down when we're discussing the answers to the 10 questions, and I'm feeling a little bit dominated by you, then our collective score could be lower than one of our individual scores. So it's all about synergy. So like in a high performing team, you've got a team where every voice is heard, every voice is on an equal standing. People know what their expertise is, and more importantly, other people know what other people's expertise is. So they revert to that person, as the person who knows what this situation. And what you get in the end is, even if you are going in with a certain amount of resources, just as long as that team covers all of the answers, and if the team relates and reacts and interacts well together, they can get 10 out of 10. Whereas if the team is not high performing, it's quite likely that you get, you might have a dominant person who might have had 6 out of 10 of the answers, and that's as much as you're going to get. He or she won't hear the quieter voice in that team and actually speaking up, saying, I actually know the answer to that one, and you're shouting me down. For me, that's it. It's like, you can see that high performance teams are teams that actually work really fast. They get through decisions. They get through, like, you can see them getting through something like 70 or 80 decisions an hour. It's amazing to watch, and we've had some analytics on it as well. Where we've done these types of courses, and they're counting the actual decisions. And from the start of the week to the end of the week, you're going from like 20 decisions in an hour to like 70 or 80. You can, with analytics now, you can actually count. You can actually count this and monitor it. And you just see the output of those teams just going through the roof.
Wow, well, that's fascinating. That kind of engagement piece. I hear a lot of people talking about engagement and the importance of communication, but I haven't heard it quite explained quite like that. That is really, really fascinating stuff, and it sounds so simple, but I'd imagine trying to get to that point can be quite challenging. Which I guess
Hugely, yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, you mentioned communications is absolutely paramount. For engagement, because I mean, in the end of the day, the old adage where you have a bunch of middle-aged men and women sitting in the boardroom deciding what everybody ought to do, and maybe all the heads of function across the top line of an organization deciding this is what we're going to do, and we send down these initiatives, and then they get surprised when the initiatives are not adopted, and when people are not following them. It's purely because you haven't united everybody behind this common goal, and they're just saying, look, screw your initiatives, because we're going to do it the way we were doing it all the time anyway. So one of the next phase of Kentic that we're going to kick off early in 21. It just stacked up too much to get it out this year, even though I'd love to get it out this year, is what we'll call Accelerate. It's a conference that we had a year ago, and we're going to breathe some air back into it, and that will be a teams of teams approach, and we'll use technology for that. So we work off Microsoft Teams in Kentech, so everybody has one of those accounts, and what this will be about will be anybody anywhere in the world in Kentech can come up with some sort of initiative to say, well, look, for example, it could be a HR or something. It could be to say that, look, onboarding for us is not working. It's just not working. There's too much bloody paperwork. By the time we get it all done, the guy or the girl is actually already in, and they're not onboarded properly, and they don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't even know where the canteen is to go for lunch. So that person goes up on Teams in a little piece of piggyback software, I can't remember the name of it now, and says, I'd like to form a team about onboarding. And then people from across the globe in Kentech, and we've 3,500 employees in 18 different countries, can actually jump onto that team. So they then publish to say that, okay, we're going to work here for 4 weeks. We're going to examine our onboarding procedures that have been handed down, and we're going to recommend a change for them. So you might have somebody in Kazakhstan and somebody in Far East Russia and somebody in Houston. They would all kind of feed into this, and then they'd come back up and they'd say, right, here's the old procedure and here's what we're recommending. It might go back up to the HR lead eventually, and it would be adopted, And we're hoping that you're kind of going after kind of peer-to-peer, where it's almost like we're going to create this canvas for these teams to emerge electronically, virtually across the world, and then we're just going to let it fly, And we'll celebrate the ones, and we'll publish the teams that have come up with something and something that's been adopted. So then, clearly then that onboarding, because it's now come from people who are actually going to use it, will be adopted, and then the people out in, let's say, I don't know, in Egypt are far more likely to adopt it, even if they weren't on the team. They know that their mates in Kazakhstan who actually know what they're talking about, because they're doing projects similar to us. They've gotten it right, and they've sorted this out for us, and then maybe someone from Egypt will repay the favor with whatever, a request for information procedure or something like that.
That sounds like that feeds very much back into your engagement piece and giving everyone a voice and an opportunity to make a difference, and an opportunity for people to show kind of leadership, even if they're not working in a specific leadership role. John, can I ask you, in terms of, like, what's been the biggest challenge, do you think? Is there kind of one big blocker to implementing these kind of strategies, or what are the biggest challenges you see?
Yeah, I suppose it varies from company to company, but at the heart of it all is that you will have some people that are just resistant to change. They've been doing it. They've been doing the job that they've been in for 2 decades, and they've found a rhythm that works for them. So you're trying to find a way to, you will have a group of people who are absolute change merchants and love change, and they'll get behind anything, and they'll give it their best shot. But you do have to almost isolate what I would call as key influencers. You almost have to identify those key influencers inside the teams. And for the most part, they're generally not managers, they're generally people on the team that the rest of the team are looking at to say, is he or she gonna, is he or she really gonna change and get behind this, And it's difficult, when you're sat back in a corporate environment, it's difficult to actually have a finger on the pulse to actually know who those people are. So that's why you have to kind of, decentralize the control of the company into those regions and into those teams, so that the people that are rolling out can identify those key influencers. I mean, one of the most important roles in change is what they call the first follower.
Right.
So you come up with a change manager. I think it was a Cotter from Harvard University talks about the 8 steps of change. But the really important person, is that obviously that you're giving this to a manager and you're saying, right, we're going to change. We're not going that way. We're going this way. The most important role is the first person that actually follows them. And if that first person can be somebody that the team would kind of think maybe he or she won't follow, then you're home and dry.
Wow.
That's what I would say. It's also it's also balancing the economics of God there. It's when we were faced with COVID there, we had to let some people go, and that's difficult. It's fine letting somebody who just isn't performing, or who's acting up and not showing the right behaviors. But when you have to let people go that are fantastic professionals, that hurts. So you clearly have, your company's survival is dependent on making profit. So sometimes you got to make some really, really difficult decisions. But again, it comes back to communication and letting people know exactly why you're doing it. And I suppose, we're on a fairly steep growth trajectory. So anybody that we would have let go throughout COVID, I think we've actually rehired some of them already. So we'll be going straight back for those people.
Fantastic, John. Fascinating insights. I know we're coming to the end of the session. Can I ask you one final question? We're in an era now of remote working. It feels to me like, and many other people I talk to, we're probably never going to go back to where we were. Has that changed the dynamics of kind of building high performance teams, or how has it impacted you guys?
Yeah, I suppose, the fundamentals are still the same, aren't they? The only thing that I would say is you've got to absolutely embrace the technology, you know. And I suppose actually just to step back, even if I talk about our office here in Dubai, I think our office on a normal day prior to this would be 80 people in our corporate office, you know. And we've got with the pandemic going on, we've kind of got four buckets of people, you know. You got one bucket of people who consider themselves high risk, or they're living with somebody who is high risk, so they're not coming to the office. It's fair enough.
Yeah.
The next bucket of people who just they're not high risk themselves, but they're just a little bit fearful of going out into the public, you know, and you got to respect that. You got a group of staunch people then are saying we must all be back to the office. I want to be back to the office. I want everybody back to the office, and that's fine too. But then you got the one which your question angles at is you're getting more out. We've got a group of people here who are saying you're getting more out of me whilst I'm working virtually compared to when I'm in the office. You know, because while I'm working virtually, I'm able to do my washing. I'm able to get my food ready for the evening, and by the time I'm finished work, the evening is my own, and you're getting more productivity from me. You know, and it's really hard to argue with that. And I see it. You know, I can see our actual. I regard our office as performing better now than it was before, and we probably have on an average day maybe a third of people in the office. The rest of people are working remotely. And what it means is that the intimacy part of that trust equation increases massively. Because when I'm working at home, you know, people are getting to know Rasha, people are getting to know Jesse, my dog, and the kids are going by, and you start to see people, you know, get introduced to people's families, and you know, I mean, our head of marketing, a lady called Jo Hennigan, has always worked from home. You know, it's nothing new to her. She lives in Liverpool. She's doing that while raising three kids. I reckon she's the best marketing manager in the world, you know, and the output from her is just phenomenal. So I just going forward, it's a balance of it's got to be free choice for everybody, but you do have to embrace the technology, and even the people that are not savvy with technology have to be open to communicating on various channels. I think I've got like 5 different video pieces of software that I have to communicate with, you know, between Ring Central and Teams, Zoom, Skype. You know, you just gotta be open to it, and be flexible with your teams, you know.
Excellent, John. That's fascinating and great to hear about the technology piece as well. John, listen, that's been really fascinating to get your insights there. Thank you so much for coming on again, and I really will look forward to seeing you when you're back in Cork sometime soon again. Thanks a million, John.
Definitely, that was my pleasure. Yeah, great conversation.
Great stuff.